This is not a story. This is a warning. Across America, there are places where the nightmares never end, and the truth was buried with the dead. Tonight, we open another door. Welcome to the American Nightmare. On the night of October 28, 1987, 7 passengers boarded North Star Airlines Flight 2283 from Tampa, Florida, bound for International Falls, Minnesota. We know this to be true. We also know the plane touched down at 2:15 a.m., smooth, centered, perfectly aligned with the runway. A flawless landing, performed by a plane with no living crew on board. No captain, no first officer, no flight attendant, and none of the 7 passengers who departed Tampa that night. Only one man remained, a man who was already dead. What follows comes from flight attendant Margaret Ellison's personal recorder, rescued from the cabin floor, and from aviation transcripts never released to the public. This is the true account of Flight 2283. Tampa International Airport, 11 p.m. The airport was almost silent at that hour. Warm Florida rain tapped against the tall glass windows of Gate B7, blurring the runway lights into long golden streaks. The whole terminal felt hollow, like the night itself was thinning out. A handful of tired late-night travelers stood near the boarding door. Only 7 passengers would make this final northbound run. Margaret Ellison, the lone flight attendant, noticed them all. The businessman rubbing his temples, briefcase stuffed with papers. The grandmother clutching a rosary and murmuring soft prayers. A young couple, nervous but trying to act excited. The college kid with headphones around his neck, eyes half closed. The man in the tan coat, still and tense like he'd rather be anywhere else. And lastly, Daniel Hawthorne, late 50s, thinning horseshoe hairline, scruffy stubble, eyes dull and unfocused, skin pale under the orange terminal lights. Margaret noticed immediately something wasn't right with him. He walked slowly, like his legs might give out. His breath seemed shallow. And when she asked if he needed help, he looked at her like he had just woken from a dream. "I'm fine," he whispered. But he wasn't fine, and she knew it. Margaret watched him shuffle down the jet bridge alone, rain flickering behind him. He took a seat in row 18, far in the back, staring at nothing with his hands limp in his lap. She told herself it was just fatigue, late flight, bad weather. Everyone looked half dead at this hour. But Daniel wasn't half dead. He was almost entirely gone. The intercom clicked on as the engines rumbled awake.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Robert Hale. We're cleared for departure to International Falls. Weather's looking manageable. Just a few pockets of turbulence on our climb out. We've got a quiet flight tonight, so sit back and relax. We'll get you there safely.
Routine, calm, confident. Margaret felt a little better. The plane lifted into the dark, rainy Florida sky, shaking lightly as it pierced a tall column of storm clouds. Inside, the overhead bulbs flickered once, just once, as if adjusting to altitude. Margaret began her aisle check. Everyone looked tired, except Daniel. He sat rigid, breathing shallow, eyes unnervingly wide. His head was slightly tilted, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. When she leaned in to ask if he needed water, he didn't react. His fingers twitched subtly on the armrest. A sheen of cold sweat glistened on his forehead. Margaret stepped back. Her instincts whispered, "Keep an eye on him." 20 minutes into the flight, the plane hit a mild patch of turbulence. Nothing serious, but enough to wake the businessman and make the grandmother grip her rosary tighter. The couple whispered anxiously. The college kid recorded a short video of the shaking cabin. The man in the tan coat pressed his head back, trying to stay calm. Margaret returned to the galley, but she couldn't stop glancing toward row 18. Something about Daniel's posture was wrong. He wasn't shifting. He wasn't swallowing. He wasn't blinking. He looked like a wax figure someone had forgotten to pose correctly. 30 minutes into the flight, Margaret decided to check on him again. She approached quietly, forcing herself not to imagine the worst. "Sir? Mr. Hawthorne? Are you okay?" No response. She touched his arm. It was cold, too cold. Her breath caught. She leaned closer, fingers trembling as she checked his wrist. No pulse. His chest wasn't moving. His eyes, still wide open, reflected the overhead light in a dull, glassy way. His mouth had fallen slightly open, frozen in a soft O shape. Margaret stumbled back, muffling a gasp. She reached for the intercom and dialed the cockpit directly. "Captain Hale, Daniel Hawthorne in row 18. She swallowed hard. "He's gone." A long silence. Then Hale's voice, tight and low.
"Understood. Just follow protocol. Keep the passengers calm. I'll update everyone shortly."
Passengers sensed something was wrong almost immediately. They always do. Margaret hurried back down the aisle, but eyes were already watching her. "What happened?" whispered the grandmother. "Is everything okay?" asked the young couple. The businessman stood halfway, blocking the aisle. Only the man in the tan coat stayed frozen in place, staring straight ahead as if bracing for something unseen. Margaret retrieved a white cabin blanket. Her hand shook uncontrollably as she draped it over Daniel's face. But the shape of his open eyes beneath the thin fabric still made her skin crawl. When she stepped back, a sudden cold breeze drifted past her legs, sharp, unnatural, out of place. She shivered. There was no draft, no vent nearby, just that cold. 10 minutes later, the intercom clicked on again. But this time, Captain Hale sounded wrong.
"Folks, we're hitting some unexpected turbulence. Nothing dangerous, just stay in your seats. Margaret, continue protocol up there. We'll keep you all updated shortly."
He sounded distracted, uneasy, like he was trying not to say something. About 20 minutes after Daniel's untimely passing, turbulence leveled off. The cabin settled into an eerie stillness. Margaret made her way toward the back and stopped dead. The blanket she had placed over Daniel's face was now folded neatly on the floor, and Daniel Hawthorne was staring sideways. His dead eyes pointed directly at the man in the tan coat. The man whispered, Why is he looking at me?" Margaret had no answer. A faint tremor ran under the cabin floor. She grabbed a seat back to steady herself. Then the overhead lights flickered, once, twice. Then a sharp click sounded above the aisle, and the cabin lights died all at once. Instant, suffocating blackness swallowed everything. Passengers gasped. Someone sobbed. The engines felt louder, closer, wrong. And in that thick void, something stood in the aisle, tall, distorted, like a man stretched too thin, its limbs too long, its outline trembling as if made of smoke and bone. It didn't move. It just waited. Then the lights blasted back on. Margaret gasped. Passengers screamed. Daniel Hawthorne sat perfectly still again, head forward, dead eyes staring straight ahead. But row 9 was empty. The man in the tan coat was gone, completely vanished. Only his glasses remained on the seat. And this is where Act 1 ends. The first time the cabin went black, North Star Flight 2283 lost more than its lights. It lost a man. The tan coat was still there. His glasses were still there. But the man himself was gone. The overhead stuttered back to life in a sickly chain down the ceiling, one buzzing tube at a time. Margaret O'Connell blinked against the sudden light, fingers digging into the top of a seat as the plane rocked in the storm. Row 9, left side, empty. His seatbelt lay open, the metal tongue resting where his stomach should have been. His coat still draped over the armrest. His glasses sat neatly on the cushion, lenses fogged from the sudden temperature shift. There was no way he'd walked off in the dark without anyone hearing him. I was looking right at him before the lights went, and then he just wasn't. Eleanor clutched her rosary so tight the beads dug into her palm. The young woman across the aisle whispered, "Where did he go?" And her boyfriend just shook his head over and over, as if repetition alone could undo what they all saw. Charles Bingham, the businessman, unbuckled his belt and half rose into the aisle. "Excuse me," he snapped, voice too loud in the close air. "Ma'am, where is he? People don't just vanish." Margaret swallowed, feeling every pair of eyes in the cabin turn toward her. I'm sure there's an explanation," she lied. "He might have gone to the lavatory during the outage. Maybe he didn't walk past us," Eleanor said, her voice thin but firm. "I'd have heard him. I felt him breathing behind me." The storm muttered against the fuselage, rain hissing over metal. Somewhere deep in the plane, something rattled in rhythm with the turbulence. Margaret forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll check with the cockpit," she said. "Please, everyone remain seated and keep your belts fastened. It's just a power surge. We're perfectly safe." Nobody believed her. But for the moment, they wanted to. She made it 3 steps toward the front before she felt it. Cold. Not the usual air-conditioned chill of a pressurized cabin, but a strip of winter across her nylons, like someone had opened a basement door in January. It slid along her ankle and up her calf, a ribbon of breath from something that shouldn't be inside a sealed aircraft at 30,000 feet. Margaret stopped, hand clenching around the seat back. Her eyes drifted down the dim aisle. No one was standing. No one had moved. And yet she felt, for the first time, that she was not alone in the aisle, that something tall and watchful was occupying the same narrow space as her, just beyond the reach of light. She breathed in, counted to 3, kept walking. Behind her, the passengers were starting to turn in their seats, whispering, counting silently. 7 boarded in Tampa. 1 was already dead in row 18. Now the man in the tan coat from row 9 was simply gone. And Daniel Hawthorne, dead Daniel Hawthorne, had changed. Before the first blackout, he'd been angled toward the window, slack jaw hanging open, the horror in his eyes frozen in one final silent scream. Now, as the bulb steadied, his head lolled toward the aisle. His fixed stare lined up cleanly with the empty space where the man in the tan coat had been. Eleanor refused to look all the way back there. The young woman in row 10 did. She stared, knuckles white on the armrests. "It's him," she whispered to her boyfriend. "I swear to God, he was facing the window before. Now he's turned. He's watching us." Charles rubbed his eyes roughly, as if he could reboot reality by sheer force. "Lady, the man is dead," he said. "Bodies don't move." Eleanor finally turned just enough to see the back of Daniel's head over the seat. "What if it's not his body we should be worried about?" she murmured. No one answered. On the cockpit voice recorder, there's a long stretch of silence right here. Only the steady hum of the engines and the hiss of the storm. No words from the captain, no check-ins with Minneapolis Center. Just the sound of a metal tube cutting through the sky. Margaret never made it to the cockpit on that first attempt, because the lights flickered again. Once, twice, then longer. Every person on that plane knew what was coming next, even if they hadn't consciously admitted it. "Please," Margaret whispered under her breath, fingers white on the galley counter. "Not again." The cabin plunged into darkness. What happened during that second full blackout survives only in fragments. In the recovered cassette tape from Daniel Ruiz's handheld recorder, there's a burst of panicked breathing, the whine of the engines, and then the high animal whimper of a young man trying not to scream. A faint click as he hits record, the scrape of his sneaker against the floor, and under it, almost too low to hear, something else. A dragging sound. like a heavy coat made of smoke being pulled down the aisle. In one brief flicker, just a hiccup of emergency power, the tape picks up a flash of light. The last row, row 18, empty. No dead man. Just a dark silhouette standing where he should have been, stretched too tall for the ceiling, edges dissolving like fog. Then darkness again. Witnesses described it differently later, if you can call their final messages witnesses. Eleanor remembered a presence brushing past her knees, tall enough to fill the aisle, cold enough to eat the air. The young woman in row 10 described, in her last voicemail to a friend, a shape standing between her and the lavatory door, tall and featureless, its edges smearing in the darkness like wet ink. On the tape, just before the second blackout ends, there's a single thud, a muffled cry, and the faint scrape of fingernails against plastic armrests. Then, the lights returned. Row 12, right side, Daniel Ruiz's seat, was empty. His headphones lay tangled on the cushion. His notebook sat open on his lap belt, pen still clipped neatly to the spiral. His body was nowhere. And once again, row 18 had changed. Daniel Hawthorne was back in his seat, dead, still, buckled in. But his head had turned further. Now those wide, glassy eyes were staring directly at the young woman in row 10. She saw it first. "He's looking at me," she said, voice paper thin. Her boyfriend reached for her hand. "It's just the turbulence, the angle." No, he wasn't like that before. His eyes, look at his eyes." Charles finally turned around and saw what they all had been trying not to see. The dead man's pupils seemed wrong in the cabin light, too wide, too bright, like they were drinking in every flicker of electricity. For the first time since Tampa, Charles Bingham didn't have anything to say. Eleanor's lips moved around a prayer that never fully made it out. From this point in the flight, every flicker of light became a loaded gun. Every dimming bulb, every surge, every hiccup in the power. They knew the pattern now. Lights out meant someone would vanish. Lights on meant the dead man would choose his next target, simply by looking. And that was when the captain finally spoke again. Not before the first disappearance, not before the second, but after. The seatbelt sign chimed once, sharply, then went dead. Static crackled through the ceiling speakers, crawling over the cabin like invisible insects. Then, from every speaker on Flight 2283, the captain's voice returned. It did not sound like the same man who'd cheerfully welcomed them aboard in Tampa. It sounded wrong.
"Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I trust you've all noticed our little power failures. By now, I'm sure you have all seen it. Our visitor. It only appears when the cabin goes dark, sometimes standing in the aisle, sometimes right beside you. Do not look at it. Do not speak to it. And whatever you do not move. Even the slightest movement might draw its attention. And as you've already figured out, you absolutely don't want that. Enjoy the remainder of your flight, ladies and gentlemen. It will be the last one you ever take." This is your captain, signing off for good.
Every passenger on Flight 2283 heard those words, and every passenger reacted the same way. Silence. Not disbelief, not laughter at a morbid joke, just silence. The frozen animal kind that lives between a heartbeat and a scream. Margaret stared up at the speaker over her head, then back down the length of the cabin. Dead man in row 18. 2 empty seats where living men had been. A girl in row 10, now under that awful, unblinking stare. Margaret, disturbed and confused about the pilot's unsettling announcement, made her way to the cockpit to see why our captain would make an announcement like that. Her hand found the cockpit door handle almost on its own. She keyed in the emergency override code, the one she'd been trained to never use unless the crew was incapacitated. The latch clicked. The door swung inward. On the flight recorder transcript, there's a faint intake of breath at this exact moment. Investigators believe it was Margaret, because the cockpit was empty. Both pilot seats sat pushed back slightly, shoulder harnesses hanging loose. An ashtray on the side console was still warm, a thin wisp of smoke curling from a half-crushed cigarette. The instrument panel glowed in eerie shades of green and amber, dials gently correcting, trim wheels spinning tiny increments as the aircraft rode the storm. No captain, no co-pilot, no one. The plane was flying itself. And yet, the yoke on the left side twitched just a fraction, as if someone invisible still had their hand wrapped around it. Margaret backed out of the cockpit, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She did not tell the passengers what she'd seen. Not yet. Back in the cabin, the fear had mutated into something sharper. It wasn't just about the missing anymore. It was about the one who stayed. Daniel Hawthorne, row 18, dead. The blanket she'd draped over him lay folded by his shoes, exactly where she'd seen it before the first blackout. Someone had moved it, and it wasn't her. Now his head was cocked at a hideous angle toward row 10, jaw slack, eyes fixed. Eleanor watched Margaret move slowly down the aisle, stopping briefly at each row, her voice too calm, her hands shaking just enough to betray her. "You see it too, don't you?" Eleanor whispered as the attendant passed her. "Every time the lights go, he disappears. And every time they come back, he's looking at someone new." Margaret didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because from this point in the investigation, Act 2 of Flight 2283 is where the rational world finally loses its grip. On the radar screen, the jet is just a green wedge carving through a storm. In the maintenance logs, it's just an aging North Star commuter plane with a few electrical issues. But inside that narrow metal tube at 30,000 feet, a dead man was steering the fear of the living, one stare at a time. And somewhere just beyond the boundaries of the aisle, something else, something tall and patient, was waiting for the next chance to step into the dark. The storm outside raged harder than anything Flight 2283 had flown through that night. Lightning flickered against the windows in long, violent pulses, like camera flashes capturing moments no one wanted to see. Margaret felt each flash cut across the cabin as she backed away from the aisle, whispering to the remaining passengers to stay calm, even though nothing inside her felt calm anymore. Fog was spilling thicker from row 18. It crawled low, dragging itself forward like it had weight, like it had intent. The young couple clung to each other. The grandmother clutched her rosary so tightly the beads left impressions in her skin. Charles, the businessman, had stopped blinking altogether, his glasses trembling with each shiver. Margaret swallowed. "Everyone, stay in your seats." Her voice cracked. The lights flickered again. When they came back on, the couple was gone. No sound, no scream, just two empty seats. A purse lying abandoned, a jacket still folded in a lap that no longer existed. The fog swallowed that row next. Margaret backed away further, hands sliding along the seatbacks for balance. "Hello?" she whispered into the dark. "Can anyone hear me?" And something answered. Not a voice, a shift in the air, a dragging weight. She turned toward row 18. The visitor was there, standing fully upright now, head brushing the ceiling, arms longer than before, shoulders scraping the overhead compartments, its edges warping, like it didn't belong in one frame of reality. It took one step forward. The floor vibrated under her feet. Margaret staggered back toward the front of the plane. Fog rolled after her in slow, deliberate waves. Charles stood frozen in the aisle, clutching his briefcase like a child holds a stuffed toy. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Only a thin line of steam left his lips, like his breath was freezing on the way out. A shadow passed over him. When the lights flickered again, Charles was gone. Only the briefcase remained. Margaret's pulse hammered against her ribs as she reached the front galley, hand trembling over the intercom. "This is..." Her voice cracked. "This is Flight 2283. If anyone can hear us, the cockpit is..." She looked over her shoulder. The cockpit door was half open, lights dead, no pilots, just silence, and the faint smell of burnt cigarettes. Something moved behind her. Margaret pressed her back to the wall, the intercom slipping from her hand. "Please," she whispered. "I don't understand what you want." The visitor stepped into full view of the aisle, all 7 feet of it, hunched, trembling with distortion, its body pulling the shadows toward itself like it was drinking them in. It leaned forward. The aisle bent with it, warping, stretching, like the plane itself was bending away in fear. Margaret covered her mouth, tears welling. She didn't scream, didn't run, just stared as the thing cornered her in the narrow passage between the galley and the door. It stopped inches from her face. Its head twitched. A long, slow shudder rolled through its body. And then, black. Everything went dark. Not a light, not a sound, just silence. 2:15 a.m., International Falls Airport. Rain fell in slow, steady sheets on the empty runway lights. The control tower received a ping on their radar. Flight 2283's transponder, right on time. The tower crew exchanged confused looks. No radio contact, no distress calls, no warnings. The runway lights activated automatically as the aircraft glide slope locked in. And out of the storm, descending through the fog, came North Star Flight 2283. Perfect approach, perfect landing. The wheels kissed the ground smoothly, like the plane had been guided by an expert. The emergency crews rushed down the tarmac, approaching the still-moving aircraft as it coasted to a stop. The engines powered down, the lights dimmed, and the cabin door remained closed until responders opened it. Inside, no passengers, no crew, no Margaret. Only luggage, abandoned seats, a still flickering light above row 18. And in seat 18C, Daniel Hawthorne. Head cocked sharply to the side, mouth slack, eyes wide, staring at nothing. The dead man who had boarded alive, the only soul aboard Flight 2283. The plane was intact, the storm was fading, and in the black box recording, only one sound could be heard in the final 30 seconds of flight. Footsteps, too slow, too heavy, too long, as if something tall was walking down the aisle long after everyone else was gone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed our flight. Be sure to visit us again next week, same time, same place. We will be traveling to Texarkana to bring you another terrifying true story about a hooded man. A man who stalked lovers' lanes, crept along the back roads, and vanished into the night without a trace. A phantom who left a town frozen in fear, and a community desperate for answers. Until then, keep your doors locked, keep your lights on, and whatever you do, don't look back, or you could be included in the next American Nightmare.